Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the preview of Günter Wand's 10 best recordings. Now, Günter Wand is a splendid case study in the history of the record industry, and I'm going to have a very good time identifying his 10 best recordings. However, if you want to watch that video, you need to be a ClassicsToday.com subscriber. And if you haven't subscribed, please consider doing so. There is a link at the bottom of this video that you can follow in order to sign up. But in the meantime, let's just talk about Günter Wand for himself. What an interesting character. Now, he spent much of his career with the Gürzenich Orchestra in Cologne, and then he was a conductor in Cologne Radio, where he made some of the first recordings that we're familiar with now, his first Bruckner cycle. But he actually, he described himself, let's put it this way. He said when he finally became famous, he was, of course, in his 70s and 80s, and he said, "I am not a conductor of the old school. I am an old conductor of the new school." His model was Toscanini, actually. He was entirely of the sort of Toscanini Zell type, school of serious rehearsal, but he spent his earlier career actually as a contemporary music guy. He did premieres for example, of works by Messiaen and other horrifying modern German composers. But later in his life, like the Buzzards coming home to roost, as so often happens, he decided to return to the nest and specialize in the German standard repertoire that he loved most of all, and that he felt he was ready, after a lifetime of conducting everything, including that music, to finish out his career. That was the idea, leaving that legacy behind. Because, he's one of those guys, the classical music industry every so often wakes up to old people. It realizes that there's some old relic buzzing around somewhere who hasn't made records and who's ripe to be publicized like crazy. And they grab them and they start making records. It was the same thing with what's her name, Slunchinska, or whatever her name is, on Decca, who just came out with a record, and she's in her 90s. She's a lovely person, a lovely pianist. She was trained by everybody, but she'd been teaching in a course at a university in Southern Illinois or somewhere. And then here she was. And so now she's back making records after long decades. And Günter Wand was something like that, because he made a few recordings. They showed up in this country on Nonsuch of, various repertoire, not a lot. Some of them were quite good. He was always a very good conductor. He really was. You don't all of a sudden wake up at the age of 80 and decide that you're going to be a master conductor of the German repertoire. He was already one hell of a great conductor. He really was, but nobody was paying attention. So now, here we are, all paying attention, especially to his Bruckner, which was really fabulous, I have to say. It really was very, very good. He was the real deal. It wasn't like he was a phony old German conductor doing German repertoire. He was truly a great German conductor, and we're very, very lucky that the record industry latched onto him when they did. But here's the thing. Here's the twist, because there's always a twist. The twist was this. There was a time when recordings were designed to preserve your latest thoughts, your last thoughts, your ultimate thoughts on the repertoire in question. And Wand had that perspective, at least going into this exercise. He really did. And the reason we know that is because when he did Beethoven, he did not remake everything. There were pieces where he said, I just can't do them over again. I can't do them any better. The one is the one, and that's it. Now, what he did not reckon with were two things. The first thing is the fact that the record industry was going completely insane and was going to just follow him around with microphones, recording everything he did. And once he had done everything in Cologne, he became conductor of the NDR Symphony Orchestra, North German Radio in Hamburg, and he remade a lot of the stuff with them. Not all of it, but a lot of it, including there. He did his Beethoven cycle, his Brahms cycles, and something like that. He redid some isolated works by Schubert and Schumann and whatnot. And then he did them all over again at the Berlin Philharmonic. And that was just insane. The idea being, of course, that, well, the Berlin Philharmonic was the Berlin Philharmonic. It had to be better than the NDR Symphony Orchestra. Well, we'll see, won't we, when I give you his 10 best recordings. But so there was just all of this senseless duplication, particularly of Bruckner. There must be 7 or 8 Bruckner 9s floating around. I mean, every time he picked up a baton and did a Bruckner symphony, there it was. Live, Günter Wand does Bruckner or whatever again and again. And when you think about how crazy it is, when you think about, for example, Otto Klemperer, who did Bruckner Sixth, and when he did Bruckner Sixth, it was a huge rarity. It had the catalog practically all to itself. There were very few other recordings out there, and very, very few. Günter Wand did 3 within 10 years or 15 years. I mean, that's completely insane. The same guy doing the same music, 2 different orchestras, once in Cologne, twice in Hamburg. And the least popular or least well-known of all of the mature Bruckner symphonies. At least he didn't do it again in Berlin. But just think about that for a minute. Wrap your brain around the lunacy of doing that kind of thing. And so the 6th, he did 3 of, and that was the least famous. I mean, the 9th, goodness, unbelievable, unbelievably silly and pointless. Of course, artists being restless and dissatisfied types, they think, well, okay, I could always do better, and that maybe just, maybe I can improve a little bit, or this was a better live recording. So that was the first thing he didn't reckon with. And the second thing he didn't reckon with is what happened with the German radio archives opening up and being tasked with the job of making money by selling these recordings that they'd made, both of live performances and radio broadcast performances. And a lot of that stuff featured Günter Wand. So not only did RCA have, 5 or 6 or 7 Bruckner 9ths, but all of German radio had more of them. And Profil was there to have a Günter Wand edition of dozens of CDs of the same stuff all over again, with different German orchestras, radio orchestras primarily, and they're all good performances. They really are. They're some of them are magnificent. I mean, he was a great conductor and an enormously consistent conductor. And in his later years, he insisted on getting sufficient rehearsal time and to work his magic. And he had very specific ideas about how to perform this limited repertoire of stuff that he was running around doing. And so there's just ridiculous amounts of it. And I just, So anyway, there was a time, this was my point, there was a time when a record represented the last thoughts of the artist, or the most mature thoughts. And yeah, okay, maybe if the technology changed, you went from mono to stereo, or from 78s to long play, or from LPs to CDs, or analog to digital, you remade things for the new technology. You had another opportunity to have a go at it. But generally speaking, you presented a fully formed, quasi-final thought to the extent that you would be content to leave this product for posterity. Well, all of that went completely to hell as a result of these twin factors, at least in Günter Wand's case. And so you've got many, many recordings of things that are all really just about equally good, but and then, of course, how long did they stay in the catalog? They recorded all this stuff, they issued it all, then they deleted it all. There was a Günter Wand box, there was the best of Günter Wand, there was Günter Wand the live recordings, there was the last recordings, there were all these mini boxes. Here's a couple of them here. Here's his Beethoven cycle. They took these things from the big boxes and issued little boxes, and now what's left in the catalog is just this mishmash of stuff. There was a Berlin Bruckner box. there's no way to tell, because it's all the same repertoire, what's better, unless I tell you, of course, and what really matters. And I can just imagine, how rueful he must feel about the entire experience, because he really did think this was his opportunity, and yeah, it sure was. But to have so many versions of the same stuff floating around, his attitude was probably, well, it's not my problem. If the record labels want to make it and they want to issue it, let them do it. What do I care? But, I believe that artists really ought to care. Of course, after he died, this stuff kept coming out. That wasn't his fault. You can't exercise artistic control from beyond the grave unless you have executors and very tight contracts and good lawyers. But I really think that the history of his discography is a wonderful little cautionary tale, because it is a magnificent legacy, but it's so confusing and so difficult for anybody to make sense of. And who at any of these labels who recorded all of this stuff, they're sitting on this pile of very, very good stuff, like Fafner sitting on his hoard of gold. One piece of gold looks like another piece of gold, doesn't it? More or less. I don't think all of it's equally great. I think we can make distinctions once you've heard it all. But then somebody has to sort through it. You have to sort through it as listeners. And why do you want to have 6 recordings of the same Bruckner symphony by the same guy? I know Bruckner people do. Forget that, But normal people, how much time, how much money are you going to invest in one guy's idea when you can get 50 different guys' ideas, or girls' ideas, or people's ideas, or whatever pronoun you're using this week? You can get different ones instead of just the guy's one, and they're all fine. And it's just a mess. It's such a mess. So I'm really looking forward to telling you what I think his 10 best recordings are. And I guarantee that they are absolutely marvelous. And frankly, his 10 not best recordings are pretty marvelous too. He did not make a bad record later in his career. He simply didn't. He stuck to the repertoire he knew he could do, where he really had something to say, where he had the technique, the ability, the knowledge, the talent, the insight, the musicality to really make a statement. And he did make a statement, but it's a statement that has been seriously diluted with the circumstances in which it was created. And it's something to think about for all of us, I think. Anyway, I'll see you over on ClassicsToday.com. Like I said, if you're not a member, please consider signing up. You'll find it's worth it, I think. It'll really be a lot of fun over there, talking about Günter Wand and all the other, like several dozen conductors now, their best recordings as well, and all the other reviews with sound clips and stuff that you can do that I don't have to worry about copyright claims on YouTube. Oh, it's such a joy. So please, thank you for joining me. Take care. Keep on listening, and I'll see you on the other side. Bye-bye.